I'm here to welcome you and introduce to you two Wellesley legends, Mary Lefkowitz, class of 57, and Madeleine Albright, class of 59. I know you're thinking that the 50s was a very great time to be at Wellesley, but I think actually it's always a good time to be at Wellesley. Madeleine Albright, the first woman U.S. Secretary of State, is a household name. The person who has given not only her name, but also the purpose of existence to our institute. We will always thank her for that and for giving us many opportunities every year to get together and educate more women and ourselves on important global issues. Thank you for being here this year again, Madam Secretary. She is joining us tonight on the opportunity to discuss the issue that has captured the attention of the whole country, if not the whole world, in the last few months. Do facts matter? I know it's incredible that in 2017 we are even discussing such a topic. I mean, aren't facts the cornerstone of every human civilization? Can you even have a working society without ultimate respect to facts? And is this the first time in history that we have faced such an incredible question? When we were discussing with my colleague, Joanne Mary, the director of the Albright Institute, the question of who should we ask to address such a topic, Mary Lefkowitz was the obvious scholar who would be the best in position to address it. Indeed, we are extremely happy to have Mary Lefkowitz with us today to start the dialogue with Secretary Albright with title, Do Facts Matter? How events in ancient Athens help explain the present crisis in American democracy. Although Mary Lefkowitz, Professor Emerita of Classical Studies at Wellesley, retired from teaching in 2005, that's 12 years ago, she continues to be an active member of the college's intellectual community, working on scholarly articles as well as participating in seminars and lectures. I think Mary exemplifies what is often said about our best academicians, that they retire in order to find time to do some work. She's definitely that. She is one of the best-known classical scholars in the world, and I will give evidence for that soon. And it is an honor to have her at this evening's dialogue. Having earned her BA from Wellesley in 1957, Dr. Lefkowitz received her PhD in classical philosophy from Radcliffe College, today is known, I think, as Harvard University, in 1961. But she had returned already to her alma mater in 1959 as an instructor of Greek, and she was named the Andrew W. Mellon Professor in the Humanities in 1979. Her many distinctions include fellowships from the American Council of Learned Societies, the National Endowment for the Humanities, and the Onassis Foundation. In 2004, she received the Radcliffe Graduate Societal Medal, and she was the 2005 recipient of the Wellesley College Faculty Service Award. In 2006, she was awarded the National Humanities Medal for outstanding excellence in scholarship and teaching. As I said, she has been very productive since retirement. Recently, she has been writing about Greek drama. Together with James Rome, she has co-edited The Greek Plays, a collection of translation, as usually happens in this business with extensive background information, published in 2016 by Penguin Random House in the Modern Library series. Her book, Euripides and the Gods, in 2015, seeks to show that the poet is not trying to undermine traditional religion, but rather describes with brutal realism what gods are like. In 2016, it was shortlisted for the Phi Beta Kappa, or Phi Vita Kappa, as we should say, Gauss Award. She has also returned to some earlier projects. In 2016, she published the 4th edition of Women's Life in Greece and Rome, which she co-edited along with Maureen Fant for some 40 years. The second edition of her book, The Lives of Greek Poets, came out in 2012. He describes how and why ancient biographers constructed fictional life stories from the poet's own works. The second edition of Women's in Greek Myth appeared in 2007, and earlier works include things that I have actually studied. Greek Gods, Human Lives in 2003, about the crucial role which deals with, played in the gods in ancient narratives. And her books, Not Out of Africa, Black Athena Revisited, and History Lessons, deal with controversial theories about the origin of ancient Greek civilization, were widely reviewed and discussed in public media during the 1990s. And that is something that has very close relationship to the topic we will be talking about today, about truth and facts. I would like to add a couple of personal notes to my introduction, to my greatly scholarly introduction that Mary has brought to Wellesley. She was the first person to welcome me to Wellesley 25 years ago and invite me to join her and her colleagues in the weekly meetings at Translating and Analyzing Ancient Greek Authors every Thursday noon. To me, Thursdays were, Wellesley was like a neighborhood facing the Acropolis. It was really warm and very welcoming. She also is the person who put Wellesley on the map for my colleagues at my alma mater, the mathematics department at the University of Athens. When I told my colleagues that I had gotten a job at Wellesley, they looked with acceptance, and they said, "Oh, good." When I told them that this is where Mary Lefkowitz is teaching, there was excitement, there was noise, they were shouting across the corridor, "Hey, George, come to see where Takis is teaching. She's teaching at Mary Lefkowitz School." I cannot ever thank you enough for that. Without further ado, please welcome our two speakers.
Well, Secretary Albright asked me to go first, so that's what I'm going to do. And do facts matter? Well, obviously not. But they should, I think. And I thought I'd take as an example something that everyone who studies classics has to confront, which is the story of the Athenian expedition to Sicily. This is in 415, 414, 413 BC, so a few years ago. Well, I was thinking about this in the light of what we're going through in the United States, and I'm afraid we'll be going through much more. Start here, if you've all got a handout, there should be it at every table. So if you don't have one, this should help a lot, because names are always very hard to remember. So this is the statement by Scotty Nell Hughes on the Diane Rehm show, saying they're not really facts. It's kind of like looking at ratings or looking at a glass of half full of water. Everyone has a way of interpreting them to be the truth or not true. There's no such thing, unfortunately, anymore as facts. So everything is subjective. And this reminded me so much of a passage in Book 3 of Thucydides about factionalizing, breaking down into factions. The Greek word is stasis. And it's very strange, because we're at that point here, too. When I was young, which is quite a long time ago, as you now know, it was the Republicans, you could talk about Republicans. You could even vote for them. I'm afraid I'm betraying myself here a bit. But the parties weren't that far apart. But now this is a time of great bitterness and great division. And the meanings and the values of words, Thucydides, this is about a revolution in a city-state, Corcyra, which is Corfu, we know it as in English. What has caused this? Why in war and times of great disagreement does this come up? So I wanted to talk about what is a fact. And the bit of etymology that's on here is that a fact is something that's done. Latin facio, factum, and it's something that is, it's happened, it exists. And a fiction is different. And that's what I think we're hearing a lot more now, is fictions that are disguised as facts, but there's something that's created, that are made. And the etymology is different. It's needed, that's the origin of that word. Truth is firm, it's enduring in early Greek. It's what is, it's related to the verb to be. In later Greek, it's what's not forgotten. You give an accurate report. So it's aletheia or aletheia in modern Greek. So they understood this distinction in antiquity. I think people have always understood that there's a difference. Well, let's talk about this. The example I wanted to pick was something that the Athenians got involved in the Peloponnesian War, sort of towards the end of the 5th century BC. And this was the city of Milos, which was a colony of Sparta. And remember, it's Athens versus Sparta. And Athens being the city that we think of as the inventor of the great Greek society and the great works of literature. Sparta didn't produce literature. They were great soldiers. And of course, they won the war that dragged on for years. It was a terrible war. But just before the Athenians made a decision to go to Sicily to send a big expedition, they destroyed a city-state, which is an island in the Mediterranean, Milos. And because they were a great empire, they thought they could do it, and they just said to them, well, you have no alternative. And the Melians said, but we have hope. And this is just this, it's right there, the Melians reasoning that surrender offers no hope. They made a stand, and the Athenians completely destroyed them. They killed the men, and took the women and children into slavery, which was standard operating procedure in the ancient world. Hope. They were hoping that the Spartans would come to save them. They were hoping that something would go right, didn't. So even in Greek drama, this is often put on. In drama, strangely enough, I mean, you read Aristotle, you get all sorts of impression about what drama might be. But I think it's really about ignorance. It's about people not understanding what's going on, and then everything goes wrong for them. That's Oedipus. He thought he could beat the oracle that told him he would kill his father and marry his mother. So he walked right into doing that because he didn't realize how ignorant he was. So Euripides put on a play which is very often performed in the United States and elsewhere, very popular, The Trojan Women, about how the Trojans, you know, what it's like to have your city sacked and the Greeks come and take everything away. But the warning is there for the people who were destroying, that is, the Greeks, by the gods who say, well, you're going to be destroyed soon too because you aren't honoring the gods and you're not behaving as you should. So the Athenians were not really paying attention to what they were doing, I think, or what they were getting themselves into entirely, when they thought that they had the power of the sea and they could control an empire which stretched over the islands, and they thought they might extend it through to Sicily. But if you look at the map on the second page, you can see that Sicily is pretty far away from Athens. And to get there, you've got to row primarily. You can't use sails because it's northern hemisphere is prevailing westerlies, so you've got to fight against the wind. It's a big place to go. And here's Thucydides talking about this idea. Why did the Athenians decide to go to Sicily when they had troubles at home with the Spartans? Why did they do this? And they set sail. They decided, to go off. and most of them were ignorant of the size of the island, the size of the population. They didn't realize that they were undertaking a war not much less demanding than the one they'd been waging against the Peloponnesians. And they did it because envoys from some cities in West Sicily, so it's even further away, were asking them to help them against Syracuse, which is on the east coast of Sicily. And you can just see it on this map. And so the Athenians went, they sent an embassy, they went there, and they wanted to confirm that they had the money, they said, and it sounded really wonderful. They were going to get a large amount of money, 60 talents, but they thought that they were extremely wealthy and that they could make a lot of money by going there. Now, one general in Athens, Nicias, as you pronounce it today, was really very doubtful about this, and he said, don't succumb to a desperate passion. It's the word eros, which means passion, which means, overwhelming desire to do something. Don't do this. Few things go right because you want them to go right. It's beyond your reach, and that's very loaded religious language in antiquity. But another general, Alcibiades, is a famous, flashy character, and he began his speech. He gets up there, and he starts, and he says, I won more Olympian victories than anybody. Now is that a qualification? No, not. But he begins by saying that, and he says, well, don't pay any attention to these people. The people in Sicily, mixed origins, they're sort of a rabble of people. And if you go to page 3, they don't have really great weapons, and they're really not very well organized. And if you get to paragraph 4 on page 3, it's for that reason, he says, it's not likely that they're going to put up much resistance. Well, when you hear that word likely, you know that there's very little information behind that. We're just reasoning that. And they might be quick to join us. And since they're divided into factions, they're not organized, that's how we understand they are. Does he really know? And then he begins with an analogy, and it's a false analogy, really. They don't have as many hoplites, that is, heavily armed soldiers who could fight. No, because, and we don't have that either. We've gotten those numbers wrong, so they're getting those numbers wrong. And then in paragraph 6, I've heard that we'll have plenty of people who hate the Syracusans, so they're going to come over to our side, and we're going to be able to attack Syracuse, and we're going to be able to win that. Don't worry about troubles here at home. Nicias, the general, had said, we've got too much on our plate. We've got Spartans waiting to invade us. We ought to really be careful. Don't worry about them. Our fathers had the same problem. They won the Persian Wars. They won, not only in 490 BC, but in 480. So, analogy from history. We were great once. Sound familiar, doesn't it? So, then, when it looked like they were going to do it, Nicias thought, well, all right, I'll discourage them by asking them for a bigger force. Send more people. So instead of that working, it worked against him. They said, fine, we'll send even more people. And passion came over them. This is just in this second paragraph. A passion came over them to set out to do it. What is the reasoning? The older ones thought they would achieve what they set out to do because they had a lot of people. And the younger ones were persuaded by longing for new sights and adventure, and they thought they'd survive. And the common people and the soldiers thought they'd make money. War was a good way to make money. You sack the cities, you take the stuff, you get money that way. And so they had the great means of acquiring untold wealth. It's all hope. It's all selfish. People are thinking for themselves, I can make money, I can do something, I can get rich. And I think this is rooted in human behavior because it's a survival strategy. We all want to look out for ourselves, even though we're taught over and over again to look out for the other person. Numero uno is always going to be a big consideration with us. So why didn't they hear what Nicias was saying? And I think psychologists would call it dissonance theory. Just didn't want to hear it. You're thinking of what would be good for you or what you would like to see. And the Greeks themselves would call it hope. This word, it's elpis, elpida. It means a kind of hope or expectation that may not have much connection with fact. And if you remember the story of Pandora? And Pandora and her jar. It's not a box in the ancient text, it's a jar. And inside the jar were all sorts of diseases, but hope remained in the jar. The diseases also all came out, and they travel around, and they plague us all. But hope remains in, and I've been wondering for years, why was hope in with the diseases? But the answer, I think, is that hope isn't a good thing. And we have it. We all have it. We don't just get it occasionally. It's built in. So what happened to the Athenians is, as you can guess, is that the expedition was a failure. First of all, the people who invited them, the people from Segesta, and to help them, didn't have the money. They'd been tricking them. They'd sent the same wealthy plates and things that had been given as an offering in the temple. They sent them around to every meal that the Athenian envoys were present at, and thus deceived them into thinking that Sicily had a lot more wealth and those cities had a lot more wealth than they did. And then in the summer of 413, after a number of wars, a number of battles in this war against the people in Syracuse. Meanwhile, of course, Syracuse had gotten help from Sparta, had gotten some generals, had gotten some advice. And here were the Athenians far away from home and making a number of mistakes. They were completely defeated by the Syracusans, and Nicias is executed, and the surviving Athenian soldiers used as slaves in the quarries. And Thucydides concludes, this was the greatest Hellenic achievement of the war, and in my opinion, of all the Hellenes wars that we know about, it was the most glorious for the victors and the most unfortunate for those who were destroyed by it. It's real something, those of you who've read Aristotle on tragedy, it's real peripeteia. It's really a flip of fortune. It's like the endings of so many tragedies. It's Oedipus, think of him. Starts out as king, everyone's looking up to him. In the end, the most wretched of mortals, whose fate we can't envy in any way. And I think Thucydides had this in mind very much when he wrote this account. So how does this, what more can we say about it? I just, on the last page, I put down how Sophocles describes the human condition. And we're back to hope again. He says, for widely wandering hope brings profit to many men, but to many the deception, which is ate means blindness, of thoughtless longings. And the word again, the longing is erotes, the plural of eros. And man knows nothing when it comes upon him until he scalds his foot in the blazing fire. For in wisdom, someone has revealed the famous saying that evil seems good to him whose mind the God is leading towards disaster. Ate, same word again. Now, what Thucydides has done, I think, is to innovate, because Sophocles, and the traditional view, is that ate, this blindness, hits you from outside, but he sees it, Thucydides, as something inside of us. And he sees it as part of the human condition, to anthropinon, the thing that, anthropos, the word you know from anthropology. And he says, I shall be satisfied, right at the beginning of his history, he says this, if my history will be judged useful by those who wish to have a clear picture of what happened and of similar events since, because of the human condition, they will at some point happen again. My history is a possession for all time rather than a prize competition to be heard on a specific occasion. And just back to that first passage where I began, the savage factionalizing advanced. Many and cruel things fell upon the city-states because of factionalism, so long as the human condition remains the same, to anthropinon remains the same. These things happen and always will happen, but they can be less violent or different in appearance as changes in circumstances require. And I think this is sort of where we are now. Many and cruel things fell upon the city-states. Is it hope? Is it delusion? They're both the same. Is it cognitive dissonance? I think I'll turn this over to the secretary to comment.
Well, thank you. That was totally brilliant. Thank you so much. And it gave me a lot of food for thought, which is I do teach, and I was just preparing my class for what I'm going to do on Monday, talk about the decision-making process. And so the case studies that I put down for my students was how the decisions were made on Afghanistan, on Iraq, and Libya. And it's exactly the same. I think that there are facts, but there's a difference between facts and intelligence that comes from the community. And I was reading the memoirs in terms of how we got into Iraq. So I have said this all along, is the Clinton administration was clearly a part of the precursor to what was going on. And we spent an awful lot of time in terms of trying to figure out what had happened after the Gulf War. There were inspectors that had gone in to see what had happened to the weapons of mass destruction. And in fact, the inspectors had destroyed more weapons of mass destruction than the war itself. So what happened in 1998, the inspectors were thrown out, and there was not a full accounting. And there were people that ended up in the Bush administration who were trying to persuade us in 1998 that we should invade Iraq. Paul Wolfowitz was one of them. And the Clinton administration decided not to do that. So then we leave office, 9/11 happens. There had been all the stuff to do with Afghanistan. And there was a question whether there were weapons of mass destruction. And I was asked the question, and I said, we didn't know. The problem, and this is to the issue, just to stay in the right era, intelligence is the Achilles heel of decision-making. And it is, for those of you that have seen it, the intelligence community never says what is going to happen. They give a lot of scenarios. This could happen, that could happen. And you come in the morning, you read all this stuff, and they will say, the Defense Intelligence Agency disagrees with that. So you never get a clear picture. So the intelligence is the product, and the decision maker is the consumer. And the consumer is basically a product of his or her own gestalt on things, what they see. I can guarantee you that President Gore would not have seen the same things that President Bush saw. And so the facts may be the same, but the person that is dealing with them has a different attitude. And I think that is this is brilliant. And I literally, I've just finished reading the decisions that were made, what the decision-making process was, who had the influence on it, what were the hopes that they had, what was their motivation for wanting to do something. And there are all kinds of analyses that W wanted to avenge the fact that his father was almost assassinated, or the fear factor, or what had happened I could spend hours on this. Bob Gates, in terms of writing about how the surge happened, a lot of exactly the same things. I just stunned listening to you on this, because the story is exactly the same. And the question then becomes one of what is it that the decision maker is presented with? What are the motivations of the decision maker? And so what is a fact? And it is harder, in fact, to make sure that you know, because there are things that are not knowable, because things change. For instance, when we were dealing with trying to get Osama bin Laden after the embassies had been attacked in '98, we would get intelligence that said they had seen a tall man in a white robe walking across the desert, and you thought, great, but then it turned out to be 6 weeks before that. So the Achilles heel really is, there may be facts, but the timing of them is difficult, and they are viewed by a decision maker who has a different view. And so our problem at the moment is, I have said this now in not so tongue-in-cheek, is there any intelligence in the White House after tomorrow? And then if you don't even trust those that are providing the intelligence, which in itself is complicated, and the intelligence community feels that it has been disrespected, the combination of all that makes it even harder. And you are dealing with somebody who does not know what a fact is. And so I think we have some very complicated issues to look at in terms of decision making and what we know. And now you add something else to it, which is what does the public know? This stuff does not get into the newspapers. And what it does get in the newspapers, we're not sure where it comes from and whether it's right or not. So it's hard enough. And I can tell you what it was like when we were in office. I read more. I'd come in the morning. First of all, my routine. I would read 5 newspapers at home. Then I would go into my office, and as Secretary of State, I had on my desk a booklet, which was the take by the Intelligence and Research part of the State Department that told me what had happened overnight. Then the briefer from the CIA would come in and give me the PDB. Now everybody knows what that is, the President's Daily Brief, which is only read by about 6 people in the government, so you know what the President has read. Then they give you the NID, the National Intelligence Daily, which is what the PDB is based on, and then a bunch of other papers, and you sit there. By the way, the intelligence briefer would sit with me, and I thought when I first started my job that she was sitting there in order to see whether I moved my lips when I read, but basically to answer questions. And then what would happen is there'd be disagreement among all of this, and these are people that are of goodwill, that work very hard, and a lot of it is supposition. It's very hard to, when I think about how hard it was to know what happened in Sicily if you're in Athens, but it's not that much different than trying to figure out what has happened in Kabul, and now the issue is President Obama is being criticized for not having done enough about Syria. We didn't have the right intelligence on who the rebel groups are. And so I think the decision-making process and the credibility, we have to say there is such a thing as truth, but it is very hard to come up with it. And I think there has to be some modesty in terms of thinking about it, and the motivations and the thought process is exactly, I was stunned listening to you, Mary, because it's exactly the same thing that I just finished reading in Gates's books and various memoirs of where they get their facts and how they make decisions based on them. Thank you.